Banjo Land, Mike Heading here. I've got a short little mini lesson for you today. This time we're going to be talking about capo tips and tricks. So I'm going to show you the basics to using a capo on your banjo. These will also apply to guitar and mandolin, but this is the basics to using a capo on the banjo. And then I'm going to show you a couple tips and little things I've picked up over the years that'll just make it a little bit easier, get you in tune a little bit faster. All right, here it is. All right, let's start breaking down this capo lesson. So these tips will work for any instrument you're capoing with, whether it's banjo, guitar, or if you're using a mandolin capo. These same tips will work. I've got a pretty standard Shub capo here. That's the brand Shub. I think it was about 20 bucks. Nothing too fancy. But what I like about it is it's got this adjustable screw that I can adjust how much tension I'm putting on the capo. And I'll show you why I like that in a second. So let's start breaking down this lesson. So first thing with banjo, we've got a capo. We've got to deal with these 4 strings with the capo. And then the second step is we've got to address the 5th string that also needs to be capoed. So let's start with the key of A. So if we were going to put the capo on the 2nd fret, that would put our G banjo tuning up into A. Okay? So I'm going to start by putting the capo on the 2nd fret. And a couple tips is I like to get it really close to the frets, maybe even a little bit closer than I would if I was using my fingers to play the notes. Basically, the capo is going to change the key of the song that we're playing in, or change the pitch of the banjo. You can kind of pretend it's almost like you had an extra finger that was holding down a bar chord, but now I'm using a capo to do that, so it basically frees up the rest of my fingers to now play other strings. Okay? So that's the first thing, is get it real close to the fret. If it's too far away, one, you're not going to get a good sound. Same with if you had your fingers and you were playing too far away from the frets. Same thing with your capo. The other huge tip I would really recommend is, and this is where this screw comes into play, is don't put the capo on too tight. It's very easy to tighten this and do kind of a death grip with the capo, you know. So I'll do it, I'll tighten this screw up a bunch, and it'll make it really hard to push this down, and it'll feel like I've got a really secure grip on it. And as a beginner, it kind of tricks you into thinking that that's a good system to use, is to put it on really tightly, because you'll get a really good grip on it. But what that actually is going to do is it's going to put your banjo way out of tune. So I'm using my tuner now, and when I put the capo on that tight, it'll put my banjo sharp. So what I'll have to do is, if I put that capo on really tight like that, I'm gonna now have to quickly tune all the strings down to get me back into standard tuning, which is, especially when you're playing a live performance or something, is really time consuming. So you don't want to do that. It's also going to put you out of tune with the other instruments. If you put your capo on really tight, you're going to put yourself basically sharp. So the notes will be higher than you need to be, so it won't sound quite right with the other instruments that are capoed. So find that right balance to where you're really not putting it on too tight. I almost like to have it as loose as possible without it falling off. And the only other thing is, if it's too loose, so I'll make it too loose once, is you don't get a full sound. See how it's kind of buzzing a little bit? So that's the key. If it's too loose, it does that, which you don't want. But you really don't want it too tight, because otherwise it's going to put you sharp and you're going to have to do a lot of tuning. Maybe just a tiny bit tighter. There we go. And then hopefully it didn't put me sharp. Okay, so that's the key. That's my biggest takeaway from this lesson, I'd say, is don't put the capo on too tight. Whether you have one that slides up here, otherwise you're just going to have to do a ton of tuning. So that's a really big tip. That took me a long time to realize, is I was always putting the capo on way too tight and having to do a ton of unnecessary tuning. Okay? And next we've got our 5th string spikes up here. So these are railroad spikes that have been hammered into the neck of my banjo. These are the 5th string capo. So I have 4 of them. I have one for A, I have one for B flat, I have one for B, and I have one for C. I usually don't like to capo much beyond the 5th fret, personally. Even the 5th fret sometimes is a little high for me, but anything above that, the banjo gets, I don't know, the tone gets a little, you kind of sacrifice quite a bit of tone up there, and I don't really like that. So if I was going to capo anything beyond 5, I would switch and play out of a different shape, basically. So those are the 4 that I recommend for railroad spikes. I think you could even get away with just 3 or 2. I've seen a lot of people just have 2, but I have 4 just to make it easy. So I've got 1, A, B flat, B, and C. And you can get those installed at a music store. I don't recommend putting them in yourself. There's also fifth string capos that you can slide on a little track, but the downside of that is you have to basically screw this metal track into the banjo neck, and that can sometimes get in the way. So I like using these fifth string capos, and the only downside with these is that they actually have to put them in a little bit. You can't put them in too close to the fret because you need to be able to still play those fifth strings if you need to. So they have to put those a little bit further away from the fret, and the downside of that is this is going to put me a little bit sharp. See how I had to tune this down? So I have to bring that note down to match my third string. That's a good one. You can tune it up. You can tune it off your third string, and that's just natural. Most banjos are going to put your fifth string a little bit sharp, so it just takes a little time to figure out how much you got to tune that down to get it to be in tune. So now it sounds pretty good in A. So if I took the capo off, I pop my fifth string off. Now my fifth string is a little bit flat, so I gotta tune it back up a little bit. And that just takes a little time to practice figuring out how much you have to tune that fifth string down and up. But like I said, the tighter you put your this capo on, the sharper these notes are going to go, and then you're going to have to tune all those down. So I'd really avoid that. Another little tip with the capo is the farther you put it up, the more likely it is for it to go sharp. So if I put it up on 4, you're even going to have to tune it down more. And again, since I didn't put this on too tight, then hopefully I didn't put these really sharp. So that's really good practice there. So don't put that on too tight. That's my biggest takeaway from this lesson. Okay, so that'd be up in B, and if I did capo 3, that'd be B flat. It's also good ear training to practice, just getting your banjo in tune when you've got your capo on. So those are my biggest tips for the capo. Like I said, don't put it on too tight. Get a capo that you can adjust the tension of it, otherwise you're going to be doing a lot of tuning. Okay, and lastly, let's talk about situations where we would want to use the capo. So I've got my capo on the 4th fret. I'm in the key of B, a very common key for bluegrass. They call it the key of bluegrass, right? So it's entirely possible to play those, so it's entirely possible to play those chords, B, E, and F sharp, for example, without a capo. I can certainly play all those chords in standard G tuning, but the thing that I won't be able to get is that classic bluegrass driving Scruggs banjo sound. A lick like, you can't do that without a capo. Those notes just aren't in relation in open G tuning to where I could do that. It would be too big of a stretch. Using the capo it's a choice. I mean, sometimes they call it a cheater, but I don't want you to think of it like that. I'm stylistically choosing to use a capo so I can get certain sounds that I'm after. It's not that I don't know the chords in open tuning, so I'm using the capo to play them. It's that I'm looking for a certain sound. If I wanted to play something like, you just can't get sounds like that without the capo, and that's why the capo is used all the time in bluegrass. Earl Scruggs, when he played an A, B flat B, he used a capo. Same with guitar. Tony Rice, to play in B flat, will use a capo. It's not that he can't play in B flat without a capo, it's that you're going after a certain sound that's only obtainable with using a capo and playing in open G tuning. So think about that. You don't have to think of the capo as a crutch. You can think of it as a tool to gain access to things that you couldn't do in open G tuning. So it's used all the time in bluegrass. All right, good luck.